Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks ever so much for joining us here today. I'm going to be driving the slides. So today's, or our session, should I say, is on workplace risk assessment, confidently navigate the qualitative process. And I'm joined by two colleagues, Dr. David Towlson and Jayne Housson, and they'll introduce themselves in a moment because they know themselves far better than I do. I'm Matt Powell-Howard. I'm Head of Product Development at NEBOSH. There is a chat box, which I'm sure some of our other colleagues have reminded you of. Please keep your questions coming, and we'll try to deal with what questions we can as we go through today. But I'll quickly hand over to my colleagues on the panel for them to introduce themselves. Jayne, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So I'm Jayne Housson. I'm the Health and Safety Director at James Hall & Company. So we are a distributor for spa convenience stores across the north of England. But we have quite a range of businesses. So we do food manufacturing as well as transportation, warehouse and kind of logistics, head office support functions, and also retail stores. So we are a very varied company. So obviously from a health and safety perspective, we have a lot of different risks and a lot of different areas that we need to kind of be aware of and make sure that we're controlling well. I recently finished my NEBOSH diploma 2 years ago now. So I got best candidate for the diploma, which is a great achievement I'm really proud of, and stayed in touch with NEBOSH. So they've kindly asked me to join today and give a little bit of feedback about how we manage risk assessments in our business, and hopefully that will help you all as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jayne. I think you recently really illustrated the role about how we've got to be responsive to risk, where you said you recently took on a small dairy herd and some donkeys as well within your business, which you never saw that come in. So, it seems to have a really varied role from manufacturing through to, arable and everything in between. So, David.
Yeah, okay.
I'm David Towlson.
Yeah, I'm a director of learning and assessment for NEBOSH, but prior to that, I was in training, and prior to that, I've worked as a safety advisor, and so just like Matt and Jayne, we've got our health and safety qualifications, albeit some time ago for myself and Matt, probably nearly 100 years ago, isn't it, Matt, for us?
Well,
and so things have changed. Yeah, that's right. But I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, brilliant. Really chuffed you could join us. So the things we're going to cover off today is we're going to discuss how risk assessment is about practical steps. It isn't this bureaucratic back covering exercise, and we'll discuss about some of it's going to really be a conversation, this, and that hopefully you can reflect on and think about and take something from it. That's what we're hoping to do this for. We're going to cover some common pitfalls in risk assessment. Some of them you will recognize. We'll also talk about how to identify hazards that need controlling. Don't sweat the small stuff, and the range of resources that are available to help you do that. And then some of the simple HC tools and methods that are out there to confidently manage risk. Now, many of the people who listen in this will be very, very experienced, but there will also be some people who are just entering the health and safety profession as well. So we'll try to bring something in for everybody. But overall, really focusing in on how to evaluate risks in that proportionate and sensible manner. So there are some slides to go through. There are a couple of polls for you to get involved in as well. And please just give a bit of thought to those as we go through. So some really risk control principles here that we all think about, that we all have in the back of our minds when we're looking to undertake risk assessments. So I'm not going to read those through, you can all read. But some of the obvious ones: avoiding risks, which can result in if you just go, we're going to avoid all risks, obviously that's one way of controlling it, but then that can result in lost opportunity as well. So it's obviously not something that we particularly want to embrace, but we can avoid and control, so we can control risks in lots of other ways. But where we are now in 2024, there's lots of other new opportunities that are open to us. So question for the panel is, what role does technology play in modern risk assessment practices? I'm thinking things like AI, generative AI is certainly something that we're starting to use in our daily practice. David, Jayne, do you have any views on that? David? Oh, Jayne, go on.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So from an AI point of view, I think it's sometimes a good way of getting kind of an introduction and kind of a template and a grounding of what is out there and what kind of things you need to consider. You just have to be careful that you don't take it as read and you do apply it to your own area. You know, it's not just, it doesn't work for everyone. The things that AI will suggest will be quite generic in some circumstances. So whilst it gives you a good lead, you know, you still have to go through the process of kind of tailoring it to your own business. That would be my, so I do think it has its uses. I think it's useful. It's good from a directional point of view, but I'd always bear in mind that you still need that kind of skill and expertise to be able to do the practical implication in a workforce or workplace.
Yeah, we always talk about putting the human back in the loop, David, don't we? You can do that donkey work for us, but you're absolutely right, Jayne. That sense check, that expertise still absolutely has to be core to that. Go on, David, you were going to say something.
I agree. I mean, certainly when we've used it, generative AI to sort of give a framework and give you ideas, I'd agree. You know, sometimes it just makes stuff up, which sounds sensible, but actually you do need a grounding in health and safety to evaluate whether it's actually true or sensible. And certainly Copilot that we've used will give references that you can look up, and some of those references aren't actually relevant or supporting a point. But also in a sort of a wider sense of AI technology, we've certainly had a look at, not actually used internally, but there are lots of great ideas out there about pattern recognition, you know, image recognition, where you're starting to see from videos and preempt unsafe behavior. And you know, occasionally I've seen it being used to shut down a process that is obviously going wrong. So it clearly has, you know, lots of applications. But it's like everything, isn't it? It's just because it's there doesn't mean that it has every possible conceivable application, or it should be used all the time. Like, you know, to the man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So AI people might think, oh, AI, I use AI for everything. But of course, just because it's there doesn't mean you should use it or it's right to use it, because we really do believe in the human in the loop. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, some of us who have been in this game a long time will remember it all used to be about training videos at one time, and then pre-pandemic it was all about VR headsets and VR training, and now it seems to be 2 or 3 times a day I get some AI tool that people want to tell me about, and you know, AI advisor and an AI, you know, assessor and an AI, and we've just got to be open to these things and see where it all settles and lands. But certainly, as Jayne said, and you alluded to, David, the time savings it brings to help with that risk assessment practice, to do that donkey work, that heavy lifting, that prompts are really useful. So if you are going out to risk assess something and you're going to be talking to people, asking for some prompts on AI and the types of questions you may ask is a really useful tool. And don't be afraid to use this thing and play with it, because I'm absolutely confident that, you know, 4 or 5 years from now, we won't even really be talking about AI. It will just be an integrated part of our professional practice. So, you know, one of the first tips is see what it can do for you, really, would be my advice. I don't know if you guys would agree with that as well. So we best move on.
I think it's about not losing control, isn't it? I think it's about not losing control and not losing the fact that you have expertise in this area. That is the danger with it. But yeah, you're right. You're using it as a tool, using it as an additional colleague, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. Some of the questions that are already coming into the chat box are all around how does the AI help to navigate the risks? And there's quite a few. That's a question from Fahad coming in. I would say, when it comes to your questions, colleagues, you can keep them in English as well. It'd be really helpful. I'm really sorry, some really great questions, I'm sure, coming in there, but I'm afraid I can't read them because they're not in English, and forgive my lack of skills when it comes to language. So here we go then. Some common pitfalls. That top one is so common, using risk assessment to confirm a decision you have already made or the business has already made. I'm sure some of us will have probably even used that tool as ourselves in order to get a control in that we absolutely want. But these are common pitfalls. This is from it's quite an old research report now from HSE, but it's still worth a flick through. It's Research Report 151, Good Practice and Pitfalls and Risk Assessment. I encourage you to have a look at it. But here are the main ones that we pulled out of that research report. So use of generic assessments when a site-specific assessment is needed. I've certainly been guilty of that in the past. Carrying out a detailed quantified risk assessment without considering whether good practice is in place, and we'll pick up some of the places you can go to grab that good practice. Using inappropriate good practice, common pitfall, not involving a team of people in assessment or including workers with practical knowledge of the process. Jayne made a really good observation when we was talking about this approach, and we're going to pick up about who you should involve in risk assessment later. And I'm going to ask Jayne to make an observation about the type of people you should use in the risk assessment process, because it's really good. But ineffective use of external specialists, failure to identify all hazards. The list probably goes on and on and on. You'll have some other examples of pitfalls yourselves, but the one we really wanted to bring forward to the most common pitfall is not doing anything with those results. So you identify additional controls, and that's where it ends. You know, not doing anything with the findings of those controls is probably the most dangerous and the most common pitfall of undertaking risk assessment. You know, HSE don't look and see how messy my desk is now. Health and safety executives don't mind if risk assessments are written on scrappy bits of notes, back of, you know, the packaging that comes with a new shirt. What they really want the focus to be is on those controls. I don't know if David, Jayne, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, actually. And I think what we've seen coming through in recent prosecutions in the UK is that whilst companies might have had a risk assessment in place, when they've spoken to the employees and they don't know, or they're not following the control measures, or they're not aware of them, that is where they find the issue. It's not about having them, because ultimately, if it's not transferred to the workforce, it's just a piece of paper. And that's not what they want. That's not the culture they want to instill in businesses. So, you know, having it done, having it, like you said, nice and clean and pretty in a file is that's not the point of it. The point is to make sure that the employees on the other side understand it, implement it, and it becomes part of the kind of daily working routine. Yeah,
brilliant. Thanks, Jayne. And linking back to the discussion we just had around the AI in the chat, Sergio's just made a really good point, actually, around when it comes to AI, knowing type of questions to ask it is absolutely key to that. You know, you can get into that discussion. So if you've got an opportunity for any training, really focusing on how you can use AI with correct prompts is absolutely essential. So moving on. Linking back to what we've said there about not doing anything with the controls, HSE are taking a different approach when it comes to risk assessment. 5 steps, which is something that many of us on this call will have really drummed into us, is not something that you will find anymore on the HSE website. And it's now called, drum roll please, steps to risk assessment. There are still 5 of them. There are still those 5 steps to risk assessment that we all know and love. But it's about putting the focus on the controls. The focus for too long was around getting your risk assessments done. Well, great, but so what? Doing something with those controls. The beautiful paperwork bit, I think, is something that Jayne just really alluded to. Really, you know, that's where the focus has been on, hasn't it? About things looking right, looking pretty, looking laminated and shiny, and then filed away somewhere. But we want them visible. And David, surely most people know how to do risk assessments now, don't they?
Yeah, of course they do. Yeah, they do. What you do is you just find one on the internet somewhere that vaguely fits, Matt, because the important thing is just to have the evidence there to show to the auditor, isn't it? No, it's actually right.
Do you have a risk assessment? Yes. Okay, move on. Yeah. I don't know if you want to. There was an anecdote you gave last time we met about a place you was working when it came to the risk assessment. I don't know if you wish to share that.
Yeah, no, it's fine. This was really about the way that you were rewarded by the audit. So interestingly, the way the audit worked, actually, if you didn't have a risk assessment, it was just one finding and so many points were against you. But if you did have a risk assessment, but it was really bad, then there were lots more questions they asked you and lots more points against you. One time, my colleague, I found him taking our risk assessments home that evening because we were getting an audit the next day. I said, "Oh, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm taking them home because although we've got risk assessments, they aren't very good. And actually, I've realized we get less of a finding if we haven't got a risk assessment than if we have." Whereas my view is, if it's better to have a risk assessment that isn't perfect, but at least you're trying to improve it rather than to have nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. And from talking to colleagues at HSE, that seemed to be their view as well. They would, you know, that it's not about bureaucracy, it's about improving things. And I know when I first started risk assessing a million years ago, they probably weren't very good, if I'm honest. And the more you do them, the better you get at them. But even those ones where I first started, it was better than when the changes that we implemented was better than what there was before. So for those of you who's on this call, who's at the beginning of your career, it may seem quite a daunting task, just like you, David. It may seem quite a daunting task when you're being asked to get involved in risk assessment. We've got some questions on that in a little bit later, but there's a plethora of support around there that can help you with this. And it's not about absolute detail. It's about really recognizing what those most significant hazards are. So generic and dynamic risk assessments, we're going to pick that up a little bit later. So we'll come back to that point if we may. So here's the traditional approach. You know, the 5 steps that we would all recognize and undertake. I'm not, you know, but it is a continuous process. That's what that sort of circular image is there around. Yes, you do them, but you should also be reviewing them. But, you know, that really good place to start is have a walk around the workplace, look and recognize the hazards that are present, but don't think it's all done in a wanna. They are things that they should be reviewed. And I know, Jayne, when we spoke the other day, you said that you have a different approach to you still use a risk rating system. Is that right, within your workplace?
Yeah, we still use them. And well, we have a kind of a blended approach, I would say. So I think there's benefits of having kind of a bit of both. But what we found is that in some circumstances, it provided management with a better understanding of how to reduce risk. So obviously doing like the using the numbers, which is obviously the more kind of traditional quantitative way of doing it, having a manager that can see that it means that you've gone from kind of 20 to 15. Right. It showed them that if you put in a control measure in, it can bring the risk rating down. And I think there are some benefits to it, especially when you have a wide kind of workforce who might not understand kind of risk assessments to the level that we do as health and safety practitioners. It just gives them a little bit more of a visual. So we have used it when we still do. Yeah.
I think you said that you use as well low, medium and high risk sort of terminology, and the high risk hazards get more focused than that. Sorry, the risk assessments reviewed more regularly than the low risk. And you find that quite a good tool, didn't you? Yeah.
So and also I think it's really important when you're doing risk assessments and dealing with the risk assessments that you don't lose sight of what is a high risk task or a high risk kind of piece of kit, and actually being able to identify something as high, medium and low rather than just having kind of a blanket, it's just a risk assessment. It does help people understand what areas that they're managing are high risk and what are low risk, rather than it all just kind of being the same. So I do think there's still benefits in using that approach as well.
Yeah. David, are you going to jump in there? Or?
No, I was saying it is important because in plants that I've worked in, chemical plants, and then you have an office, you often find people that are just work in the office have a kind of a very kind of extreme view sometimes of what a risk is like they'll think that a paper, well, not literally a paper cut, but something that I would consider relatively trivial as being high risk, when actually you need to look at the risk profile of the organization because they're next door to a plant that could blow up. That's the high risk. So a chemical company, if it's not controlling its chemicals, is something wrong. And if it's concentrating more on, giving its priority to hold the handrail safety campaigns versus stopping the plant from blowing up, then, actually you're endangering everyone, and you're also giving them a false sense of security. So it has to be balanced. It's not that the risks in the office aren't important. It's just that there are things that are going to kill you if you neglect. Yeah. And there are things that will inconvenience you if you neglect them. So you just need to get that right. Yeah.
So somebody who I've worked with in the past used to work with Trevor Kletz. Many of you would be familiar with Trevor Kletz, a grand old sage of the health and safety world, and apparently Trevor had very little truck for personal safety, hard hat safety. He was, as you've said, he was like, I'm running an ICI plant here that could use like a bomb, So he would have had some sympathy for that. But I think where we've always discussed in the past, where you have risk matrices and risk ratings, some people get confused that because there's numbers attached to it, all of a sudden becomes a quantifiable risk assessment. Yeah. And of course it doesn't, because it's all based on opinion. But if it helps raise that focus and that priority, then use them if you find it beneficial. But if it works, then use it. It's a tool, isn't it? We're going to save this question for
right. Yeah.
So something that I think I was going to pick up a little bit later, and Jayne's alluded to it now, is around when people start taking risk assessments and about how everything becomes death. So, someone says, well, that training cable, someone might trip on it and die. And somebody might, and that was certainly when I started my training many years ago, working as a trade union shop steward. The training was really, really good. But I remember being sat in the risk assessment training and everything ended in death. So, and I think you've had similar experiences with one of your apprentices recently as well, Jayne, conversation that you had with them.
Well,
and about some of that confusion that falls in.
I think it's just generally people joining the industry and joining the profession for the first time and how they kind of perceive risk. Because yes, if you fall over, it could happen to someone, but it's not. But it's looking at the likelihood, and actually, if, like you said, if everything ends up in kind of the worst case scenario, we almost lose the sense of risk. We almost, everything is a risk and everything is high risk, and actually, it loses that profile that it needs for people to understand. Well, where are my dangers in the workforce? Like you alluded to, David. Like if everything in the office was going to cause severe injury, actually, we're really concerned about that. The same as really high risk jobs that are going to cause that, and so I think and it's something that I think most people when they join the profession kind of have to go through and wrap their head around a little bit, because you are trained to think about, well, what could happen, and yes, that could happen, but will it happen? What's the likelihood? So it's just something, and I think particularly when you're working with management teams or teams of people who are putting the risk assessment together, it's really important that kind of in the industry we are helping people, like guiding people through that process and kind of educating them to see, you need to, not everything can be high risk. Not everything can be high risk, and we need to kind of measure it and be sensible about it.
Yeah, because if it's high risk, why are you doing it? It should be controlled, shouldn't it? So it's the old adage that risk assessment, it's an enabling tool, isn't it? That's what we're doing it for. We're going to do this, but we're going to do it in a proportionate and sensible manner. So I think I was a bit too ambitious in the type of questions, number of slides I was hoping to go through today. But this is our first poll, and I'm told that when I click this next button, it will appear on all of the delegates' screens. So consider the sensor. I know. Hey, it hasn't worked yet, David. Consider Lucy. Our colleague Lucy tells me it will, and I trust her implicitly. So consider the most significant health and safety risks in your organisation. And one of our webinar listeners today has asked a question about how you start risk assessing for mega projects, and David alluded to risk profiling. I mean, that's a place to start, but consider the most significant health and safety risks in your organization. Do you feel they are adequately controlled? And if you don't have a workplace, and some of the people here may just be students, then consider somewhere you're familiar with, maybe a supermarket or a shop you go to, or a football, sporting event. And if you just mull that over and ask whether yes, no, or not sure, and we'll see what we get through on the poll. I think it stays open for about a minute. So, and if I click through to this next screen, we'll see what happens. Oh, well, those have answered so far. That looks promising. And that's great, you know, that people do feel that way. Jayne, you mentioned that you've taken on some new businesses that sit outside of your core. When you've taken them on, have you been, I suppose your due diligence had picked up whether or not those controls had been in place and adequately? Did you find they were all in good shape when you took those other businesses on within your mainstream?
Yeah, generally I would say so. Yeah, I think the kind of benefit of having businesses is that they kind of, well, we're fortunate that they know their business inside out and they know their own risk profile for that. But I can see it happening, you know, potentially small companies or, you know, when, you know, there's a lot of like kind of globalization going on now when companies are expanding into different countries, understanding kind of their legislation and how they have to control risk that needs to be considered and whether, you know, perceptions of risk in different areas and different cultures and locations, you know, compares against what you do in your area. I think for like kind of going forward and the way companies are growing across the world, that they are things that we all need to kind of be aware of and consider.
Yeah, actually, as we've been talking, we've had a bit more of a mix come through. 25, you know, a quarter of the people who are listening in feel that their main health and safety risks aren't controlled, which is, I don't know how I feel about that, really. You know, it's very honest and we appreciate that, but shows there's still a way to go, doesn't there? You know, if they're the most significant risks. I used to be a consultant a long time ago, and that was certainly what I found, although it was a very informal approach to risk assessment. And something you and I, David, have often spoken about, when you start undertaking risk assessment, it's very rare where there's no controls in place, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except there's usually your workplace. Yeah.
Okay. My workplace is your workplace, David.
No, you're absolutely right. It's rare that that's the case. So that's your base point. And that's because many everyday risks are fairly obvious to people because they're in your face. The difficulty people have are with things which they're not familiar with, or things they can't see, or they don't experience, and hence things like, you know, you need to be specially trained in chemical, radiation, noise and vibration to a certain extent, because the risks aren't immediate. Whereas, you know, if there was a lion loose in your building, you'd think, blimey, that's obvious what that could do to me, and you would do something about it. So, and I think it's the case with many risks in an organization. You've always got at least something in place. It might not be enough, but at least there's something. Yeah.
A few people have asked, though, and it may be that people have undertaken risk assessment and have needed additional controls. How do they get senior leaders to release the money or support them in the changes they wish to introduce? Have you got any ideas, tips, tricks there?
I've got an example where we knew what a risk was in a warehouse. We wanted walkways, guarded walkways in it, but we couldn't get buy-in. But fortuitously, we got visited by the health and safety executive who said, "Can I help?" And we thought, "Oh no, he's gonna prosecute us or something." But anyway, he said, "Allow me to make the choice for you. I'll issue you with an improvement notice," which we got because we thought we were going to be blamed for this. But actually, within a month, we got the money and everything was sorted. So actually, it just made them do what they were saying they were going to do. So actually, if you've got a helpful enforcement officer who's willing to work with you, and you know, because they know you're trying to do the right thing, then that they can be a real asset. Yeah.
I know one of the questions, or one of the observations that we have had leveled when we've gone and discussed about the diploma, the NEBOSH National Diploma, is that health and safety practitioners don't always understand the language of business. And I think that's something that we all need to reflect on. So sometimes it can be a case of saying, we need this, I want this. without thinking of the full implications of that, by doing a full cost benefit analysis, etc. So again, that's something that we need to reflect on as practitioners and see about the range of tools we can use to leverage interest, and bring management's attention to the benefits that the changes we wish to implement will bring benefits to the business and the bottom line ultimately as well. So thank you for everyone's candor with that poll. We've got another one in a moment as well. I can never read what the top of these slides says, because I've got when to assess risk. That's what this slide says. Sorry, I've got this banner with everybody's lovely thumbs up and love hearts, and it's great to see. So thank you for that. But when we should assess risk, of course, change of process technology. This is almost like a NEBOSH 101 question, isn't it? When would you look to assess risk? Changes to workplace operations, maintenance or cleaning, and certainly I've been asked to get involved in risk assessments in the past where the actual operation of a piece of equipment has been thoroughly thought about, but it's not been thought about when it's being maintained or when it's being cleaned in the food industry as well. And we picked up, missing interlocks and all sorts of things. And again, we will also reflect on our risk assessments when there's been an incident or a near miss report. This is a living, breathing document. We don't just do it once and forget about it. We go back, we revise, we review, as we've spoken about. So Jayne, question for you here. How can we improve the integration of risk assessments into daily operations? I think we probably touched on that a little bit in terms of the low, medium, high, but do you include, you link to them within your training, your standard operating procedures, or do you find that all your finders links through?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point that actually kind of the traditional way of thinking about a risk assessment is that grid on a piece of paper, and actually that it doesn't stop there. It links into safe systems of work, training, management practices, safe operating practices, and actually when you're going through a process of review with your risk assessment, or you're going to change something or introduce something, you have to make sure that follow-on is all the way. And if you're going to change something on your risk assessment, think about the knock-on effect about other ways that you train staff. I think that's probably one of the most important things to think about, that when you are going through training and integrating it into the daily work, that you also make it relatable to your employees, because they need to understand how this concept or this theory or this idea of risk, how does that actually apply to them doing their day job, because that's what they do. And you have to think about ways to speak to employees and make sure that they understand what a risk assessment is. And like I said earlier, not everyone in your workplace will be a health and safety practitioner. They won't all be trained in their kind of language and terminology. And actually, it's really important to just make it real and make it quite relative to people. And I think that is how you get that implemented in the daily job, because if you can stand with someone and say, I can see that you're doing this, this is how we want you to do it, and this is why, and can you see that this could happen? They'll have more of an understanding of what you're trying to get across, rather than, again, giving them that traditional kind of grid on a piece of paper and expecting them to understand it.
Sign this. Yeah. I mean, a genuine, if you allow me to, quick anecdote, somebody did say to me not too long ago, I said, do you communicate your findings of your risk assessment? And they said, no, because then we will be held to account. And I just thought, wow, it's 2023 at the time, but that sort of view was still out there. So David, what are some effective ways then to communicate the importance of risk assessment and the findings of risk assessments? How have you done that?
I think, starting right at the beginning is involving people in the development of the risk assessment to start with. So for example, it wasn't so long ago when it was very common to not really do a risk assessment, but effectively do it from the basis of an inspection. So it's purely physical looking. And then, decades ago, they thought, oh, maybe it's a good idea to actually ask the people in the workplace. Maybe they know something. Revolutionary. And an anecdote here was I was doing a routine work-based inspection of a machine, to get its certificate and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, hey, I'll try this newfangled thing of asking the operator. And I said, hey, have you got anything else to say? And he said, oh yeah, every time I put my hand under this switch here, I get an electric shock. And we then investigated it, and yes, it was loose wiring and everything. But the interesting thing is we would not have picked that up had it not come from him. So that taught me a lesson, really. Yeah.
And I wonder how long he'd been getting an electric shock for.
Well, there is that, but that tells you something about the culture, perhaps, doesn't it? That people just keep quiet and carry on. So that's another thing. But I did think that the value of getting that. Now, of course, they're not always right. I think, Jayne, you mentioned the other day, sometimes people get habituated to the risk and they don't really see it. So, you might like to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important to have a team of people doing a risk assessment. I think in the past, we've always been taught that don't make it a desk job, ask the person doing the job. And there are absolutely benefits in that. However, if that person's been doing that job every single day for X amount of years, they can lose sight of the risk of it, because if nothing ever bad has happened, or there's been no near misses or no accidents, do they then stop seeing the risk? And that's why it's really important that as practitioners, the health and safety community are able to ask questions and think about the what if kind of questions. Because whilst the worker is absolutely core to this, it's really important that we still ask those questions, still ask them to think about what if this happened, what if that happened, because it might not have happened to them. And actually, we don't want to get into the danger of, because it's not happened, it will never happen. Having a good team of people doing it on the shop floor, not doing it as a desk exercise or a tick box exercise, that is how you get good health and safety, and that's how your risk assessments will become meaningful.
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask the stupid questions sometimes, because that's what David's point about the guy who was getting a shock every time he put his hand on it. It's a completely different presentation, isn't it? About how people usually just do workarounds to try and get the job to work. That's another challenge for us as practitioners, where you've got loads of great people who are just trying to work with what they've got and about how
which does have positive aspects, because it introduces innovation, and we shouldn't be frightened of innovation. But at the same time, it can be dangerous. You're absolutely right. So I like Jayne's example, because you think, well, you do need to ask the what if question. Obviously within your sphere of control. I once got asked by someone, well, your plant is in the flight path of this thing. What would happen if the aeroplane hit your plant? I said, well, we'd all be dead, and then there's nothing we could do. And you're thinking, it's like saying, well, what if an asteroid strike? So there are things where you can't control it, but a lot of it is within your control. So therefore, it's legit to ask, right, what if that happens? What would we do?
Yeah. Circle of control, influence, and concern.
Yeah.
It matters in lots of things, doesn't it? So another poll, everybody. So whenever you've been asked to do a risk assessment, something I always ask when we go out to consult is, how do you feel about, how confident are you to risk assessment on completion of this qualification? So, but most of us can do, if not all of us can do a risk assessment, things we're familiar with. But have you ever been asked to do a risk assessment that you have always felt competent to do so? Something that sits outside your experience and sphere. So if you could just have a little think about that, and think about competency, and think about sometimes you may have been, or you may not have been asked to do things that you don't always feel comfortable with. So if you can just have a go at that question for us, and we'll see where we come out while it's having a little bit of a think. And then we're going to go on to talk about competency. And David, you took my bit of spiel where I was going to ask Jayne around the benefits actually of having somebody who's never seen a process before going in and asking those questions and getting people to talk to them and make observations with them. But we'll see how quickly this populates. But while that's being completed, because it doesn't seem to be much happening there, I will just move on to the next slide and I'll flick back in a moment. But competency, again, I'm not going to over-egg this, but competency, the ability to undertake responsibilities, perform activities, and a recognised standard on a regular basis. And that was a an interesting change that HC made quite a few years back now, where we used to think about competency as, you know, experience, qualification, etc. But it was amended to think about continuously exhibiting the behaviors for something to be done well and safe. It's more than just being able to do it in a one-off. You need to be able to continuously show those abilities. But when the risk assessment is particularly complex, sorry, what's it, David?
Consistency, yeah.
Consistency, for sure.
Yeah, which is also important in custard, I've discovered.
It is important in custard as well. But we're talking about risk assessment for a moment. Although we could do a risk assessment on making custard, I suppose. Could explode, couldn't it? Custard powder. But thinking about our own practice, I'm just going to flick back to that previous slide. So, I mean, this is quite telling, really. Have you always felt competent to do so? I don't see that as a weakness, that people have recognized that they haven't always been competent to do the thing they've been asked to do. Is there any observations you guys want to make on that slide? You know, I know I've certainly felt out of my comfort zone in the past when I've been asked to do risk assessments, certainly when I started out in health and safety. Jayne, you look like
I think there's a degree of danger where what I've seen is that you can identify the dangerous people if they're always sure, 100% sure, but they're often wrong. This is quite an interesting thing to do in kind of psychometric testing. So you can identify, right, how sure are you that you're right in that one? And these are the dangerous people that just go off and think it will be okay. I'd much sooner have someone that's not sure, knows they're not sure, and then actually asks.
Yeah. Jayne, sorry, were you going to?
Sorry, Jayne.
Yeah, I was going to say, I actually think it's very normal for us to have risk assessments to do where, you know, even if you're a qualified professional, you're not the competent person because certain things have specialisms. And the right thing to do is reach out to those people and ask them for some support and advice. And I always think, you know, it's better to do that and ask for help and ask for support and get the specialist advice that you need. And even if it's just for a second opinion, you check, rather than ultimately what would happen is potentially someone getting injured because we haven't reached out and we haven't made the right decision. And actually, that's why we have specialists in the field that can help us, and they are there to support us. So absolutely, I think there'll always be areas where you think, oh, this isn't really my area of expertise. Go out there and get the help. It's the best thing to do and the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Didn't you use the example yesterday, Jayne?
No, sorry.
Didn't you use the example the other day? Didn't you, when we were speaking about your desire risk assessments?
Yeah. So obviously our company is very varied. There's a lot of different kind of health and safety elements to it, and quite frequently we will reach out and get support in areas that require specialist and technical knowledge that we don't have, and I think that's totally normal. And like I said, you know, ask the professionals for the support, or the specialists for the support. Is absolutely not a sign of weakness. It's actually the other, for me. I think it's a sign of strength that you can recognise that you need a little 100%. Bit more assistance. So absolutely go out and get the help. And what I found is that any kind of third party that we've ever worked with, they're as passionate about what they do as what we are, and they give you a lot more than what you ask for because they just want to keep you and your workforce safe. So absolutely reach out to them.
I think it's a sign of competence, knowing the limits of your own
absolutely
specialisms, isn't it? You know, so right. Well, thanks everybody for the candor on that poll. Appreciate it. So worker consultation then. I don't want to over-egg this. I think we've covered this in quite some depth already, but it's that whole adage there about the job as imagined versus the job done. If you just do it as your risk assessments as a desktop exercise, then you know they're only going to get you so far, frankly. Jayne mentioned about the importance actually of having that, you know, different pair of eyes, and David emphasised the importance of talking to people who know what they're doing and what the job actually entails. But get in amongst them, and the more you talk to people, the better you'll get at it as well. You know, there's some truth in that. I know one of the one of the HSE's best-selling products used to be a set of cards to give to senior management so they know to go out on the shop floor and talk to people and what types of questions to ask. But even sometimes just asking really simple questions like, you know, what would make your job easier here is a really nice conversation starter. And then you can start reflecting on what your current risk assessments say, making sure that things are being identified as needed. But yeah, that's really important. The job as imagined versus job done. Talk to the teams. Just spend a bit of time with them. Don't even have an agenda sometimes. It's just, if you've got a bit of time in your diary, get out there. And it's enjoyable as well, isn't it? You know? Yeah. Mostly, not always, mostly.
I mean, do you know what I think also to it is that if you're trying to instill like a health and safety culture where you're normalising it, which is one of the biggest challenges of the profession, to get people to kind of recognise it and kind of do it every day, the best way of doing that is kind of having a two-way relationship. You know, if you want them to be interested in what you're trying to tell them, you be interested in what they're trying to show you and what their job is, and you will find that you know, they'll give you ideas, or they'll give you things that you've never thought of before. You know, and it's, for me, safety is a conversation, not just a we tell you do. It's two ways, and like I said, if you're trying to get people to think more about health and safety and how they work safely in their role, the best way and the only way of doing that is having those conversations with them.
And it really drives your culture as well, doesn't it? Yeah. You know, that visibility. I know one of the regular concerns I've come up against with talking to people is that they do raise issues and then nothing ever happens to them. And then that links back to your risk assessments about doing something with those findings. And it is all part of that circle, isn't it? And
it's
then
like
the consulting.
Suggestion box, isn't it? One of the companies I went to first, there was a selection box in the corner. And I said, oh, that's really interesting, everything. And until some guy said, oh, yeah, it's locked at the back, but nobody knows where the key is. And I thought, oh, well, that tells you.
Yeah. Well, but I think we've established, you know, consulting, it just brings that two-way communication. It brings buy-in. You'll find out things that you don't already know. It will confirm things you do know, but just stay visible. And it's a really good way of providing that information and training. I think Jayne made a really, really important point there. You do your risk assessment, and then it follows through to all these other activities that you also should be doing. So mindful of time. So risk assessment template. There are loads of ones out there. We've spoken about ones where there are matrices in, 5B5, 3B3, whatever you want to use is fine. The HSE template that we tend to use in our qualifications don't have risk ratings in them, but as we've established, if it works for you, use it. So there are some really nice templates and example templates available on the Health and Safety Executive website. And one of the things when you start looking at them is the amount of detail that's required. It's really quite accessible stuff. It's often fairly high level. I encourage you to go in and have a look and see where balance is needed within the risk assessment. But that visibility of the controls and sign off and accountability for getting them done is where your focus needs to be once you've identified the hazards. Okay. But take some time looking through them. They're really worthwhile. I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to whip on. But some other information that you might want to use. David, do you want to sort of say anything about this slide? I know there's lots of information where you said some resources are really useful for people to use when they're completing their risk assessments.
Yeah,
people
I mean,
there's quite a lot of internal.
Yeah, no, because here, of course, you've got a lot of internal information. But actually, if you're already doing something at a basic level, there's a lot of external stuff about to tell you how things are generally done safely. You know, there's the HSE guidance, there's ILO guidance and everything. So it can just be as simple as a gap analysis, saying, right, what have I got? What's best practice, and therefore what's the difference? But obviously you also need to localize it, because what you've got might not be what's in the guidance. It might be slightly different, and that's the danger we talked about earlier of using something inappropriately. And that's what you need the expertise to do. This isn't quite the same, so we need to alter it. So there's a whole range of stuff. So use what you've got, including the people that are there. We've talked about that already.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's lots of information for people to tap into to help inform that, isn't there? Both internal and external. So externally, of course, there's websites, publications, good practice, trade unions. I always found those to be a really, really good source of information. Worker advocacy groups, subject matter experts, and we've expanded on that in quite some while. Don't be afraid to tap into as much help as you possibly need. So dynamic risk assessments then. So we use these in rapidly changing environments, as you will all know, but they are always informed by previous risk assessments. So if you think emergency services, when they're appearing at a scene of something, there might be a whole new range of risks that they, in a particular scenario, that they've never thought of collectively, but they know how to deal with them because independently those risks will have been considered. Now, I know HSE's view is don't use the same dynamic risk assessment over and over again. If you've used it once, it then needs to inform, it's foreseeable. So it should then inform part of your general approaches to risk assessment. Is there anything either you want to add to that when it comes to dynamic risk assessments? Have you used them to good effect in your own workplaces?
Yeah, I think it's remember what they are really for me. They are almost like a stopgap when you've got a risk that you need to deal with straight away, and doing the kind of standard risk assessment or getting the control measures might take a bit of time to get in. It can't be imminent, so you have to kind of put something in to kind of plug the gap, if you will. But that can't last forever. So that is what it's there for, and it's temporary, it's dynamic, it's there to deal with what's in front of you. But I totally agree with the HSE's perspective on it, and that if it's there for weeks and weeks on end, or there's no end date, or there's no fix, then actually that's now a normalised risk in the workplace. So you use them for what they're there for, is what would be my advice on it. Definitely.
They're a good tool, but not something to be overused as they often are. I say any questions. We've had an amazing response on we've had, nudging up to 250 questions. There's no possible way we can obviously get through those. But I'll just take one at random. I'll spin the wheel. We've got a question here. It'd be great to hear more from Jayne. So hopefully, you could hopefully I gave you time to speak, and forgive me if I haven't. We've got so much to get through. Let me just find a question that we could just take quickly. Some of them are quite advanced, actually, talking about risk forecasting models and all sorts. We've picked up common pitfalls. What's the panel's feelings on, this is a question from Julie, what is the panel's feelings on asking employees to sign that they have read a risk assessment? Does that still go on? I mean, it's been a long time since I've sort of had responsibility sticking a risk assessment under somebody's nose and saying sign here.
I think my view on it is that if you can demonstrate that the employee understands that risk assessment and what it is and what it means, and they are happy to kind of sign it, then fine. But don't make somebody sign something, because if you haven't provided them with the knowledge to understand what that is, because if you aren't using a risk matrix or high, medium, low risk, or you are looking at kind of control measures, and if they don't understand the terminology, that signature means nothing, because if they were asked, well, what does it mean, they will probably just say, well, I don't really know. So I think if you've equipped your staff with the knowledge to understand it, then fine. But you can't just have it as a kind of sign off, put it in their personnel file. They know what it means. If something goes wrong, we'll get it out. No, that doesn't kind of wash really. And make sure that, does it have to be that risk assessment, or can you turn it into something relatable for the employee? They need to understand what it means. It has to speak to them. So I think it just depends on the circumstance for me.
Yeah. I mean, that's just incredible old-fashioned management, isn't it? Sign this, we can wash our hands of all the risks, and we've got something to flag. I mean, it's not how we do things now. Guys, we're going to have to bring this to a close, I'm afraid. David, Julie, thank you ever so much for Jayne. Sorry, Julie Farrow-Gann asked the question. Sorry, that's where I've got it. Sorry, Jayne. Jayne, David, thank you ever so much for joining me today. Really appreciated it. Hopefully, those people who have listened in have gained something from it. Ultimately, takeaway for me is you're not on your own when it comes to risk assessment. Tap into the resources, the help you need. And thank you for all your questions. We will try and answer some of those offline as well. And enjoying the rest of your conference. Oh, I should also say, if you'd like to link in with any of us, please do so. We'll hear from you. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you.